Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Today I want to talk about how I am planning on changing my reading. So I feel like my reading has generally been pretty straightforward. I have my set genres that I like to read, which tend to be historical fiction, non-fiction history, romance, some contemporary fiction, and some classics. Generally, I tend to read very traditional prose fiction and narrative non-fiction. And I'm always lamenting the fact that I don't read much more outside of this. And when I mean things outside of this, I'm meaning things that aren't traditional prose. Things like poetry, plays, short story collections, essays, letters and diary entries. I always see them in the library or in the shops. I see other people talk about them and I think, oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. I would love to read that. But I think a lot of the time, because of the fact that these books aren't like traditional narratives and they don't have the same kind of flow, they're very stop and start in their nature. I often find myself wanting to read them, but not prioritizing them because I know that the lack of flow is going to really bug me. But that means that there is such a lack of breadth in my reading that I just wanted to address. And I feel like recently I've had a bit of a breakthrough with this goal of wanting to implement more of that kind of reading into my reading diet. And it came through these two books. Here we have 365 Poems for Life, an uplifting collection for every day of the year. And then not this particular book, but the general A Poem for Every insert season here day. In fact, it's more fair to say that the spring version of this collection was what kind of cracked the code for me. Both of these collections edited by Allie Esiri. You'll have seen throughout my channel, but particularly at the beginning of this year, I was wanting to finally get into reading consistently these kind of collections where you are reading one or two poems each day. I always thought the idea of that sounded really, really nice, but what I was finding was that I just wasn't very consistent. The first couple of days of each collection, I would sit there very diligently and read my poem or two. And then by the time we got to day 3 or 4, I would come home quite tired. I didn't want to sit down and read my one poem. And like a little sulky teenager, I would leave it a good 20 days and then realize, oh God, I've got like 40 poems that I've got to read. Can't be bothered with that. And that was kind of holding true when I started the year. I started on the winter poems and then onto the spring ones and was finding myself having to read multiple days at a time, to the point where we got to the 11th of May, and I remember this very distinctly, where I realised that I had a month worth of the spring poems still to read, but when it came to these 365, one poem a day, I had about 2.5 months worth of poems still to read. I was really frustrated with myself and I thought maybe I just give up on this whole endeavour altogether, maybe I restart it next year. But I felt annoyed with myself because I'd already committed like a good couple of months into reading these poems. It feels very much like one of those New Year's resolutions that the second that you trip up on, you then decide, it's fine, I'll leave it till Monday, I'll leave it till next month, I'll leave it till next year. And that wasn't really instilling in me the kind of discipline that I wanted. And so on Sunday the 11th of May, I finished up all of my cleaning chores around the house. It was a lovely bright sunny day. I put my hair into a hair mask as I am wont to do, and I parked myself in my garden. And I sat for 2 hours reading the Poem for Every Spring Day collection and the 365 Poems for Life to catch up on the couple of months that I had missed. And I actually had a really lovely, joyous time doing so. And yes, I know, peak childless behaviour, being able to sit out for a couple of hours just reading poetry. I do recognise I'm fortunate that I am able to do that. But it was really, really lovely, especially these poems. What I'm coming to learn is that I like really uplifting, reflective, just joyous poems. And almost every single one of the poems in this collection is a hit for me. And by the time I got to the end of my couple of hours, I did just think to myself, I seem to have cracked something, where I realised, why am I denying myself like the joy of being able to read some of these poems every single day? I found myself getting to the next morning and actively wanting to pick up both collections and read my 3 poems. And that has continued for the last couple of weeks. So now I'm going to be picking up the summer collection, really anticipating what I'm going to read in here. I've seemed to have sorted something in my brain about reading little and often. And so I thought, if I could do that for poems, why can't I do that for the other forms of literature that I don't tend to read? And I've tried it for about a week or so and I'm really quite enjoying it. My nightstand is now populated with some of these types of books, and I'm challenging myself every day to read a little bit of each of these, be that essay collections, be it letters and diary entries, be it short story collections, be it play, be it poetry. And so I just thought I'd go through each of these. So starting off, we are back with poetry. I didn't want to just be confined to these ones that are for set days. I want to expand my reading of poetry a bit more. Generally, if I'm looking for poetry recommendations, what I will say is that I do like pretty traditional poetry. As I say, I like poems that are uplifting, but I also like pretty traditional rhyme and meter. And it's why I'm not so big a fan of a lot of modern poetry that kind of throws all of that out of the window. I feel like rhyme is half of the fun of poetry, so why would you give that up? And I've previously read and enjoyed bits of Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, and so I thought a natural continuation of this would be to read the English romantic verse. Here we have a collection of lots of different romantic poets, including Byron and Shelley, but also including William Wordsworth, John Keats, as well as other poets that I hadn't heard of, such as James Thompson, Thomas Gray, Mark Akenside. Ebenezer Elliott, never heard of this poet. And quite delightful that I'm actually hearing of somebody called Ebenezer outside of A Christmas Carol. That's quite nice. And so the game plan with this is really simple. It's really accessible, no barrier to entry. I just need to read one poem each day. If I want to read more, I can, but that's all I need to do. Then moving on to plays. I'm always really embarrassed to admit that as much as I love musical theatre, my actual knowledge of just straight plays that don't include music is really, really limited. And it's something that I do want to improve upon. I've also been really stop and start with reading Shakespeare. I feel like the Shakespeare plays that I know very, very well. And I'm always saying that I want to go through every single one. I want to read all of them. I want to watch all of them. But I think partially because of the fact that I do YouTube now, I have kind of put off reading Shakespeare because I know that I'm eventually going to have to talk about it. And I'm so anxious about, being wrong about something to do with Shakespeare, being misinformed, having an interpretation of what I read that is not actually right. But I'm trying to put that away and embrace the joy, because when I do delve into Shakespeare, I love it. So I've started myself off easy with a play that I already know that I love. This is probably my favourite comedy, at least so far, and it is Much Ado About Nothing. And once again, the aim is simple. I just need to read one scene. And considering that scenes can range between being like 5 or 6 pages long to being just 1 page long, or even half a page, that's a really simple barrier to entry. And when it comes to the poetry and the plays, I want to really feel the language, the words in my mouth. I do live with other people, so I'm not speaking these out loud, but I am speaking them under my breath and wanting to make sure that I'm paying attention to every single word, rather than what I can often do, especially when I'm watching a Shakespeare play, which is just to let the words wash over me. And so I get a gist of what is happening, but I want to really, really think about each individual word. And I'm having a really great time doing that so far, which is not something I've tended to do because I wasn't a literature student at university. Breaking down the language so intimately is not something I'm used to, but I'm really enjoying doing it so far. The type of literature that I am so far kind of struggling with, and I knew was going to be a little bit of a struggle, is short stories. The one that I'm starting off with is Normal Rules Don't Apply by Atkinson. I've always struggled with short stories because of the fact that there is that stop and start nature. I often find that a lot of short stories just feel very surface level, and no sooner do you start to get into them than they stop very abruptly. But I'm also very, very conscious that it's probably just that I'm not used to reading them, and that if I get more into the flow of them, if I read more, then I will get to grips with them eventually. But I do feel like on a day where I'm a bit more tired, short stories are the first thing for me to drop. But the aim is one short story, and we'll see how we go. I also have the selected letters of Charlotte Bronte. Once again, really simple. I just need to read one of them each night. Considering there are about 160 letters in here, that means I am going to be plowing through this a lot more slowly than some of the other books, but I don't think that is any bad thing. And once again, instead of rushing through them, I'm really enjoying just mulling over each letter, and I'm getting more of an insight into Charlotte Bronte than I've had before. I thought I knew a good amount about the Bronte sisters, but I knew nothing about her relationship to Ellen Nussey, and I've been looking her up, and apparently people have theorised that maybe Ellen and Charlotte had a romantic relationship based on the intimacy and the affection in their letters. Some people see it, some people don't. I'm reading these letters and being like, is that language that I would use with my friends? I don't know necessarily that you can read some of these and think, oh yes, girl pals. But I'm only a few letters into here. We'll see how it develops over time. The one thing I don't have on my nightstand currently is diary entries, and I would like to have something to fulfill that. And once again, it would be reading a diary entry each day. The reason I haven't gone out and bought one is because I know what I want to start with. I have the first collection of Anne Lister's diaries that I would like to use for this, and I just haven't gotten around to that yet. And then lastly, the one that is the newest entry into my little nightstand project is essay collections. I went to the bookshops and I picked up a couple of options. I have George Orwell's essays because I have previously read some of his essays and I would like to get more of a thorough understanding of his writing. However, the one that is actually calling to me at the moment is Anne Patchett, her collection These Precious Days. I actually haven't read any Anne Patchett, which seems like a glaring omission. It probably is a bit odd that the first thing that I'm starting with is her non-fiction essays, but I had a little bit of a peruse in this and I really, really liked the writing style. So we're going to start with these. I'm also considering down the line picking up some Oscar Wilde, Hilary Mantel's mantelpieces, some Joan Didion. I would love to get any recommendations, particularly for essays and short stories that you have. Actually, I forgot one more thing that I've added to my collection. I'm always seeing these big collections of short, pocket-sized works, things like the Penguin Great Ideas, the Little Black Classics. I think recently Vintage have come out with some of these like pocket-sized snippets or previews of an author's work. The one that I think is probably the most popular are the Penguin Great Ideas. I've read a few of them but I've never actually sat down and tried to read all of them. And so I am starting right at the beginning with the first book in the Penguin Monarch series, which is Seneca on the Shortness of Life, this classic work of Stoic philosophy, because we know I'm such a Stoic. My plan for this is to read like 5 or 10 pages each day to slowly make my way through it. As I say, philosophy is not something that I'm really typically a reader of, but I am finding some good little nuggets of wisdom in here, and I'm interested to carry on with this journey of great ideas. I also haven't quite settled yet on how I'm going to be approaching this. Is this going to be something that I try and do before I go to bed each night? When you break it down to like one scene, one poem, one letter, that seems fairly doable before you go to sleep. But when you add in one whole essay and one whole short story, suddenly you've got like 100 pages to read at night in some cases, and that seems a little bit less doable. So is the way forward to maybe have some of these in my bag and read them as I go about my day? My concern with that is it means that my normal fiction or non-fiction that I normally carry with me ends up not being prioritised. And that's not what I want. I want this all to be in addition to my normal reading rather than replacing it. What I have been doing is I'm doing my seasonal poems at the beginning of the day. So I will finish getting ready for work, and then just before I go out to my bus, I read my poems, which then leaves everything else for the rest of the day. And I feel like reading those poems before I go to work really sets me up for the day. It really kind of gets me in the zone of reading and reminds me that it is a fun thing to do, a fun activity, not just a chore, another thing on the to-do list. Poems, as I say, are typically pretty uplifting, so that puts me in a good mood for the day. I'm really enjoying the effects of it so far, and I want that to carry on with these other forms of literature. And I really do think that this is a good thing for my reading, really diversifying the types of books that I'm reading. I think this might not appeal to some people because, as I say, there is that stop-start nature to it, rather than being able to get into a flow and reading something all in one go as you're typically able to do with traditional prose. But I also think what is good about this is it is encouraging more consistent reading, rather than what can often happen, which is that I leave my reading until I feel like I've got a big chunk of time to dedicate to it. Doing little and often reading throughout the day, I actually think is potentially going to make me a better reader. Kind of like if you're trying to get more active, if you're trying to get more of a fitness and wellness routine, it's much better for you to plan like little fitness activities that you can do throughout the day, rather than just leaving all of your exercise to like one big intense 2-hour workout. These I see as those little pockets of reading activity. Reading a letter is like me going on a quick 10-minute walk. Reading a poem is kind of like doing stretches while I'm waiting for the kettle to boil. Whereas sitting down for an hour with my fiction book is like doing my 45-minute dance fitness class. All of these things contribute to an active life, whether that is with your fitness or with your reading, and they all add something different of value. And yeah, as I say, this is not something that I've got down to an absolute science. This is something that I'm still very much experimenting with, but I'm really enjoying the effects of it so far. I would really love to get any recommendations that you have, either for poetry, for short stories, for plays, essay collections, letters, diaries, anything that isn't your typical narrative fiction or non-fiction. Is this something that you yourself are concerned with? Do you also find yourself neglecting to read these kinds of books in favour of narrative fiction and non-fiction? Do you think that this is something that you might want to implement? Or how have you implemented it for yourself? I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.